I'm waiting for our viewers. We currently have 0.
That's encouraging.
Oh, it's 3 minutes of.
We can talk to each other.
We could all just pose with the reading.
Yeah.
Yes.
The nice thing about this, though, is that it will exist as an archive, so this is valuable anyway, and we can promote this in documentary form, too, and documentation, so it will have use beyond this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Did you all see that NAEA is doing a book club? I think it's next week on the creativity in the museum.
Yes, I saw that.
Oh, yeah, I did.
Yeah, I think
It's a hot topic.
I
It is a
know.
hot topic.
It's the 14th at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Thank you.
I think we should plug it, you know?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm glad you've got it to show.
Right.
Alyssa, so we have a nice conversation on video that exists in this kind of recorded form. Should we restart it now so that we don't have that conversation? And once we start it, it's a great video from start to finish, because you're not allowed to edit anything, right? You can't shave off the first 10 seconds.
Well, we probably could. I could probably try.
Okay. Well, either way, we could also just end it now and then restart it, and we just jump right in. What do you think?
We now have 4 viewers on. So I think we should probably go ahead and get started.
Okay. Great.
So welcome, everyone. I am thrilled to see all of you who are on joining us today for our first Google Hangout virtual book club, sponsored by the American Alliance of Museums Education Professional Network and the Museum Education Roundtable. I am Alyssa Frankel. I'm the Communications Chair for EdCom, and I just wanted to give you a couple ground rules for the Hangout before we start. First thing is we want this to be a highly participatory Hangout for you all, so it's not just us sitting up here talking about the article, but you're also free to chime in with your questions and comments. To do that, we've enabled the Q&A app in this Hangout. So you can go in and click on Q&A. Now that you've got the Hangout up, it should be showing up on your right-hand side. If it isn't, if you're seeing a different plugin there, go up to where you see 9 small boxes in the upper right-hand corner. Click on that and then click on Q&A, and you'll be able to answer and ask any questions that you have throughout the duration of the Hangout. We're going to be going back and forth. I'll be monitoring the tech on the side of the Hangout. If you have any questions, if there's anything that you can't hear that you want us to go back to, anything technical, just leave it in the Q&A, and I'll make sure that we take care of it. This is really a pilot for us as well as for you all, and we look forward to your questions and comments throughout the duration. And without further ado, I'll introduce Sarah.
Good morning / good afternoon to everyone in the various time zones. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation that is presented by the Education Committee as part of the American Alliance of Museums and also in collaboration with the Museum Education Roundtable. The focus of our conversation today is on this July issue of the Journal of Museum Education that's focused on this idea of intentionality and the 21st century museum. And it's essentially kind of a case study about the really interesting work being done at the Columbus Museum of Art in Ohio over the past 7 years, and their journey to being more intentional with their work. And so we're really pleased to be joined today by 2 people who are really integral in that project. Cindy Myers-Foley, who at the time when this was first started was the head of education and then received a more expanded role as part of this, and then also Rachel Trinkley, who was her colleague at the time, who's now at the Freer Sackler Gallery. We're also joined by Carlene Gardner, who in addition to her day job at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts is also a board member of Museum Education Roundtable, and then Beth Maloney, who is a consultant and then also the president of MERS. So we're happy to have everybody here today. It's okay if you haven't had a chance to read this yet. What we're going to do is start with a brief presentation to give you enough background to be able to know what we're talking about and to contribute to the conversation. As Alyssa mentioned, we'd love for you to use that Q&A box there. I have some questions for the panelists after we do the brief presentation, but I'd love to incorporate your questions too. So with that background, I'd love to turn it over to Cindy and Rachel. We have a short PowerPoint that we want to show you.
Hello, everyone. I am going to do the magic of sharing my screen. So hold on while I do that. Okay. Does everyone see it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. What I'm going to do is talk you through, just tell you the story of the Columbus Museum of Art and give you some context. I know the meat of what we will get into later will unravel some of the mysteries you may not hear, but this will give you some context. So first, the Columbus Museum of Art is a mid-size museum in the Midwest. It was built in 1931, and really the reason I think all of this change happened is we decided to change our physical appearance. And so what you're seeing here is our original 1931 building, the 70s building that we create, you know, well, we actually demolished, but I'll tell you that story in a moment. And then what we envisioned for a new wing. And what's really important about this is during this notion that the time we were thinking about a capital campaign and starting these physical changes, our director, Nanette Macy-Junes, made the remarkable decision that if we were going to change our outside, maybe we should think about our inside too. What did that mean? Who should we become as we change externally? So it starts with the fact that even before Rachel and I ever got to the museum, she and the board really grappled with what our mission statement should be about. There's a great story that she tells in the book about almost an argument between board members and staff about whether our mission was is it the art or is it the people? And I'm not sure they really decided on that particular day what it was about, but it led to this mission statement years later, which is phenomenal in my opinion, and it's to create great experiences with great art for everyone. What they realized is it was about both, of course, and this is the mission statement that I think allowed us to start thinking differently. It gave me a space in particular to begin thinking differently. Something else that was incredibly influential as Nanette was pushing me to articulate what does a museum in the 21st century mean? What do we look like? She also wanted to know what is the role of education. And I've been in this field a long time, and I think I had all the answers that we've used, you know, for a very long time, but none of them rang true to what she was asking me, which is what's the impact we can have in this community? It wasn't about what we provide, it was the impact. And about the time we're grappling with this, hopefully this looks very familiar to many of you, IMLS published the Museums and Libraries of the 21st Century. And so, you know, I think we're a story of great timing because we were at a time we needed to change, but also the field was changing. And this is, if you don't have this report, go download it today on the IMLS website, but this is one of the graphs that we still all have pinned up to our wall. Right, Rachel?
Yeah, I want to pause you briefly, Cindy, because I don't see your slides moving. I wonder.
No, I don't either.
Okay.
You guys don't see?
Are you on full
okay. Let me see.
Yeah.
Should I do it that way? Do you see it now?
Oh, now they're advancing, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to do it like that then.
Okay.
And not make them full screen.
Okay.
You see it now. I'm glad you stopped me. You're also going to see do you see my notes too? This might be more embarrassing. Oh well, don't look at my notes. They're my cheat sheet. Okay, I will continue with this story. Do you see this slide?
Yes.
Yeah, look, I even have a spell check there. What I think the important part, and I'm going to be talking primarily about the chapter that my director wrote and the chapter that I wrote, and I think both of us realized there was a moment where she pushed me, she wanted a one-page summary. We've all been there, right? Where she wanted a one-page summary about what it is we do and why it's important. And I remember coming back with her and saying, I can't give you that one-pager, and this is all I gave her, is this little diagram you see here. I said, I think why we exist and what we could do to really impact our community is around creativity. And I think there are two things, two aspects of creativity that we value and we actually already cultivate in numerous ways. That's the imagination, the ability to conceive of what is not, and critical thinking, processing all of the information that is available to us and doing something with that, making the imagination manifest. So, and then we believe in innovation. You know, creativity does something that changes the world. So she and I had a great conversation about this. And I will tell you what I love about my director is she then said, well, what are we doing to strategically move this forward then? What, you know, are we really capable? Can we do it? And of course that just set a whole slew of initiatives and thinking and struggling into motion. Her question turned us on, let's say. So what happened is we actually, the top 4 here were the values that the Columbus Museum of Art had at the time. One of the first things that happened is we added creativity as a value. So it became institutionalized versus departmental. It was something we felt strongly about. And I think one of the most important things we had to do is articulate what we meant by creativity. Creativity is an incredibly challenging concept to have a discussion about. We all kind of know what we mean when we say creativity, but a lot of people, you know, substitute art for creativity, and that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about a capacity to draw is equal to creativity. So we had to really fuss this out. And the main way we began to explain it to people is, you know, on our walls, in our galleries, on any given day, you will see some of the most amazing products that have been created by some of the most creative thinkers who've ever graced the planet. And we celebrate that every day. Why don't we then cultivate it and champion that kind of thinking in our community? And so a lot of what we had to really struggle with was how to communicate this. And then came the case making. I throw this in just to, you know, say we had to find not only examples of great case making, but we had to find local examples. So this was the State of Ohio Board of Education interviewed 200 of the most important businesses in the state, asking them, what are you looking for in the next generation of workers, and what do you desperately need? And I'll have you in particular look at 1, 3, 4, and 5, because there it is: critical thinking, problem solving, 3, innovation and creative thinking, and 4, communication, team learning and work, of course, 5. We were happy to see that they also felt that rigorous academic content was on there, because of course that's what the schools do. So, you know, but it's the other pieces we realized that's where we fit. This is what people need, and yet really the schools are focused on number 2. So it gave us some incredible case making in the state. One of the, and I think I also put on there, nothing helps as good as great TED Talks and incredible writers too. So people like Dan Pink, Sir Kenneth Robinson, all of those folks played beautifully into our case making. If any of you saw this issue of Newsweek, though, this became an incredibly important, because the research that Newsweek was highlighting showed that every year since around the 1960s, they've been studying creativity. They've been looking at creativity scores in conjunction with IQ scores. And what happens is every 10 years, Americans jump up 10 points in both of those categories. So we get smarter and we get more creative. And it was a kind of a phenomenal thing that they only really saw in the U.S. That is until the 1990s. And what this report showed is in the 1990s, IQ in the US continued to raise. Creativity scores began to plummet. And the decline was most significant for children's ages, grades kindergarten through 6th grade. So, you know, I think for all of us, we knew that it needed to be a focus. We just didn't know it was actually a crisis. This helped articulate that creativity wasn't something that was frivolous. It was actually a crisis in need of significant emphasis. So the other thing we had to case make around was actually this notion that I think everyone thinks we're doing it, we're an art museum, of course we're focused on creativity, but we had to say not everything that we've done in the past has actually enhanced creativity. And one of the reports that came out at this time that we needed to use to articulate to art teachers and others in the arts was that the qualities of quality art in art education report. So this was a Wallace Foundation with Harvard's Project Zero, and what they found is that quality art education, the number one thing that quality art education does is foster broad dispositions and skills, especially the capacity to think creatively and the capacity to make connections. What often happens in art education, though, is we focus on some of the other aspects, the easier ones to test, like skill development, you know, knowledge acquisition around art history or art studio practices, versus the thinking. So we really decided that's where we needed to focus, and that we were well suited to do that. Of course, then we looked at lots of different resources. We became mini researchers around this, and some of the ones that became, I think, close to our heart were the work Project Zero's doing, Reggio Emilia, early childhood approaches, connected learning, and then my personal favorite is George Sekeli, who wrote a number of books, but really believes in, from play to art, the notion that play is the truest form of art making. So what did that mean then? I've given you a lot of the context, but what it meant is that we actually opened a space. It's 18,000 square feet. It's called the Center for Creativity. It was our director saying, if we want to do this, well, then we need to put our money where our mouth is, and it consists of a number of spaces. So everything from an auditorium to multiple gallery spaces, including one of the galleries which you see here, 2 versions of our Wonder Room, which are for all ages, to be creative as individuals, as families, as colleagues. So spaces that were very intentional around cultivating the kind of thinking we were championing. So that was the first thing, but it also meant a philosophical shift for our programming, and Rachel will talk, and the way we approach our drop-in visitor and our gallery experiences. And Rachel's going to talk a little bit more about that. The other thing we had to do, quickly we found out after we opened the center that the community needed more from us. They were hungry for this, and it surprised us how much they wanted PD. We were getting calls from educators, university administrators. We were getting calls from corporations. Families needed clear articulation. So we created a lot of new tools, like our Thinking Like an Artist, and this is the list that we started with, but now we have rubrics. We pulled each of those apart. We can do professional development around each of them. So we began to think differently about the work and how we do that work. I'm going to end on 2, I think, things that are relevant to the group I'm talking to today, which is, okay, I'm an educator, and I will tell you, my institution absolutely changed in the past couple years, and it really did come from an education place. I now reflect on that, and I think it only happened for one particular reason. I think change can happen in any environment, but the reason it happened so quickly, and so effectively, was this idea of 3 leaders for change. So one, we had our director, Nanette, who I call the political visionary. Myself, as you can see, I'm there acting all conceptual. I was the conceptual kind of role. I had the conceptual role in this, and then the practical visionaries were the education team. The reason we needed all three is, first, there had to be the ideas and knowing where we might go. But I'm telling you, we needed Nanette to be there in order to champion this, not only with the government and our funders and our members, but also with local artists who weren't exactly sure what we were doing. She had to be the one that stood by it from the get-go. And then I will say nothing could have happened without a team of people who were willing to take unbelievable risks. And I think the practical visionaries are often the hardest ones to find. They sometimes they're there, but they're in waiting. They need maybe a spark, a light. I think we hit it all out of the park, and there was a group of us that we were ready for this, but we had the three leaders in place. And then the last thing I will talk about before I hand it to Rachel is just how this has changed. Before I was a director, but I reported, here's our org chart, I reported under the Deputy Director of Operations with the curatorial staff, which is, I'm going to tell you, this is all strange and we're working on it, but it was even stranger, if you can imagine, and I was just a director. What's happened since, though, is the role of education is now viewed not as just an operational piece of our institution, but actually as a fundamental part of who we are. And that's when Nanette actually moved me in the past year to being one of the three deputy directors for the institution over learning, experience, and engagement. And for me, we had to almost demonstrate what that was about, but by doing so, it has changed our org chart. Okay, so I'm going to now exit and let Rachel.
Great, so I'm going to do the same sort of screen share thing. And Cindy sort of talked about both her and Nanette's articles, and so I'm going to give you just a short preview of the other articles in the journal in case you haven't read it yet. So we had a wide range of staff write from different points of view and perspectives, and another article in the journal is titled "The Impact of the Participatory Visitor-Centered Model on Curatorial Practice," written by Catherine Evans, one of our curators. And Catherine was really writing from the point of view of a curator going through a lot of this change. How does she mediate it in her work? What does it mean to do this in a museum as a curator with new exhibitions, with the permanent collection? We started experimenting with temporary exhibitions because that's a little bit easier to do, right? It comes and then it goes away. But then we did more in our permanent collection. These are two images from an exhibition called The Radical Camera that Catherine writes about, and I think it was a big aha for her participating in this. And this, I use the word connector because this is a word we came up with internally as part of a team. And those little tags that you see in the container are used to tag photographs, and they have adjectives on them. So visitors could go around and really contemplate, what does this image mean to me, and let me sort of identify it. Here's an image of connectors as well. Seating is a connector. It's something that helps you connect with the art. So we have made sure to have comfortable seating in our galleries. Marilee Mostock. Yes.
Rachel, could I interrupt you too? Because I think the same thing is happening. I'm not seeing advance, the slides advance.
Okay, so I will do this then and make it big.
And then if you shrink your notes box a little bit, thank you, so that we can see the whole slide.
Great. So let me go back up here. Can you see okay?
Yeah, you've got the two older women slide up. Go one back. I don't think they got to see the seating.
There's the comfortable chairs, the comfortable sofa with the people sitting in them. And here is the image of the tags that we use to tag photographs in Radical Camera. Okay. Any other images I should check in on?
No, I think you're good.
Okay, great. So Marilee Mostoff wrote Making Space for Experimentation, Collaboration, and Play, Reimagining the Drop-In Visitor Experience. And so here's a couple of images of adults drawing in the galleries with crayons, right? Because it's not, drawing with crayons is not just for children, it's for all ages. And Marilee was really trying to figure out how we could learn through the lens of creativity, not just in programming, but for the drop-in visitors as well. As she wrote, you know, we often sequester learning to facilitated programs, and she wanted to bring it back out into that drop-in experience. So she really oversees connectors in the galleries and research about how are they doing? Are they actually impacting visitors in the way that we designed them for? In the upper right is a voting station. On the left are some visitors playing with sand in the galleries for an exhibition around play in the summertime. So there's a variety of ways we can get at the outcomes of our exhibitions. And in Marilee's article, she really writes about intentional outcomes for each exhibition that we work with. Jessamy Jones wrote Examining Why, our work with teachers in schools, where we really had to question our assumptions about how we work with teachers in schools and why we do the work that we do. And I think we really shifted to looking at how we can create a deeper impact on visitors, or excuse me, students, schools, districts, and developing partnerships with them, relationships with them, instead of you know, offering things that they might take advantage of. How do we know that it's working? So here's a couple of images with early childhood and teachers stacking chairs for professional development as part of a teacher institute. And then on the left here in this image is teens at our learning lab, our after-school learning lab that we partner with 4 other institutions in Columbus. And then on the right is a program called Project Pivot, where we partnered with teens from one individual high school over 4 years of their high school careers. And we're just sort of tackling the research and evaluation with all of that right now. I wrote about nurturing a culture of change, creativity, and docents because I oversaw the docent program there for a few years. And so how do you help the docent program shift and move forward if we're going to be intentional around creativity? Where we place our emphasis for school tours and field trips is really around critical thinking. That poster, that ODIP poster in the lower right-hand corner, is a thinking routine that we designed at CMA, and we employed that in our school tours. You'll also see Lois standing in the upper right. She was a roaming docent, so not just having tours, but having folks available to answer questions. We partnered with the local Alzheimer's Association to offer tours as well. And then we created big ideas and outcomes again for our tour. So outcomes are critically important to pretty much everything we do. We always ask, well, why are we doing this to start? And it has to align with our bigger overarching philosophy of creativity. Lastly, the role of imagination and reimagining the art museum was written by Jessica Luke and Janine Anslett, both at Audience Focus, and they have served as our evaluators for a long time, many years, as long as we've been on this journey, and we wouldn't have been on this journey without them. They helped us in a variety of ways, but they didn't just come in and externally serve as external evaluators. I think of them as coaches, as guides, as critical friends who would provoke us with questions and really help us think about why we're doing the work that we do and are we going in the direction that we need to. Game show in the upper right is a great example. We created a game show for young adults to do creative challenges, but we found they weren't practicing their creativity. So game show went away, and instead that morphed into a partnership where we partner with local creatives and artists. So yeah, here's a couple more images. Really, Janine and Jessica serving as external evaluators, as coaches and capacity builders, really provoking us to do our work better. So I'm going to stop screen sharing and rejoin the group now.
Great, thank you for that presentation. One of the things I really appreciated about the articles was the honesty, really. It was kind of radical for you all to say that we thought we were really serving the needs of our visitors, but actually we could be really more intentional in doing so. And I think all of us in museum education think we are really serving visitors' needs, but I think all of us too could maybe think more intentionally about our work, and your really focus on creativity is very specific and strategic. Since the issue just came out, I think a lot of people might think that this project is new, but it's actually 7 years old. It started a long time ago. So can you talk a little bit about how long it takes to make this kind of sweeping institution-wide change, and maybe what factors speed it up a little bit and what factors slow it down?
Great question. Yes, 7 years. Now, I will say it feels more like two and a half. You know, I think when you're in the midst of something like this, time goes quite quickly. But to just reiterate, I think the reason it happened quickly for us was a number of pieces. One, we were changing and externally, and we took advantage. I've been thinking a lot about this. I've even worked in other institutions when we were doing either capital campaigns or changing. We actually did less of other kinds of changes. It was almost the safe way to go. And we either didn't know that or we were just naive, I'm not sure, but we took advantage of, we're changing here, so let's think about the whole picture. So I think that's key. If you're in a moment of change, capitalizing on it. Two, we had the right people. That 3 leaders for change, analogy, or however you might look at it. I don't have to convince anybody listening that directors are everything. I give my director kudos all the time. But I won't say that at every moment, and Rachel, you can contribute here, was she fully, I mean, she had her moments of wavering and questioning, but what I like about Nanette is she would bring us to the table and we'd have to make a case, we'd have to talk her through, and she allowed that to happen. So it in my opinion, even though it was 7 years, it was fast. I know museums don't move in this speed that often, so that time frame is very responsive to the situation we were in.
Yeah, 2 more things too. I think you're right that Nanette sometimes wavered, and I think that sometimes it was the biggest challenge for folks who loved us and were already committed to us. And so to see us really question what the art museum experience looks, sounds, and feels like when they already liked what we had, it was really hard for them to change. And so I think that's where the most difficult conversations happened. With Nanette, and even with a lot of us, we all had those conversations, and so we needed to share that messaging and that language. And I also think we were under the gun in terms of, it was 2007, 2008 when a lot of this really started rolling, and that was, we went through a depression in our country, and we were really seeing writing on the wall. Are we going to survive? How are museums surviving through this? What should museums be doing? And I think that external pressure in the economy also really forces us to think and maybe move more quickly. I don't know if that really helped us move more quickly, but I know it was something in the background for all of us.
Great. Greg is bringing up a really good question right now that I was curious about too, and just that change is hard for people. How do you bring people along? And part of it, I think, has to do with, Rachel, what you were talking about in terms of communicating the mandate or the message. One of the things I really liked in one of the articles was the very simple, clear idea that the Columbus Museum of Art was going to become a place that people use versus merely visit. And especially Columbus being a city, I was just there recently, I can attest, is a wonderful city, but it doesn't attract a lot of tourists. So you're really relying on the local community to come and really use it. So that simple message, I think, is a really nice way to communicate to the staff. But can you talk a little more about how that message was communicated to staff who were maybe more receptive to change and others who weren't, and how that was navigated, and just over time, over the 7 years, maybe how that mandate might have shifted, and how you would bring along new staff members to get on board with this institution-wide focus?
Great point, Sarah. I think, well, first off, I'll give Nina Simon credit for the use versus visit. We totally stole that from her, and she, when she was here, we loved having the conversation with her about that. That, you know, again, libraries are places people use, right? And so simple statements like that helped, I think, a lot of our staff understand things like why we wanted to be participatory, why we wanted to be about lifelong learning, why we wanted to be about visitor-centered. So there were ways we got to some of the essence of how we were going to change. I will tell you, creativity was a much harder piece to communicate. And so one thing I should share is that there are about 14 people in the education division at the museum, and we spent unbelievable amounts of hours and evenings, and we started sending articles back and forth. We dove into this topic in an intense way, and I will also say we brought certain people along, but we abandoned everybody else. We had to understand it for ourselves. And that worked to a point, and then I think it backfired. So one of the challenges is we needed to do that, and we needed to own where we were going. Again, it was about the leaders coming from you know, a different place in the institution. But in the long run, it wouldn't have worked for sustainable purposes. We now have shifted gears quite a bit around communication and trying to get this idea to be owned across the museum, not just within a department. So I would say that's probably the place that we failed the most, is in the institutional communication, especially around creativity. Even though we had like summits and staff meetings and all of these mechanisms to communicate, what we in the end realized is they needed to do it for themselves. So, you know, now we do initiatives where development does creative events. They do creative cooking classes for in relationship to exhibitions for a particular group of members. And so now that they own it and they think about it, it's very different from back when we were shoving it forward.
I also think that we started out with a cross-departmental sort of strategic interpretive plan that Marilee Mostoff sort of shared and helped move forward, and that was really important in getting us all to the place of being visitor-centered. But I think we didn't continue that when we were talking about creativity. And then I don't know, Cindy, in the past year maybe, I know there's been a lot more focus on really interdepartmental teams, more around intentionality in what we do, like in public programming, more so than creativity, but make sure that sharing of dialogue is happening and that people do have the opportunity to come up with those ideas on their own is so critical. That's what we know about learning, right, is that they have to have that opportunity. So that was pretty critical.
I want to spend a little more time talking about the benefit of all of this internal work to the public. It's one thing to get your house in order, internally speaking, but if the visitors aren't reaping the benefits of that, it's kind of pointless. So talk to us more. We got a little bit of a sense from the images that you showed us in your slides, but tell us more about how the audience reap the benefits of this hard work.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think there are subtle ways that they reap the benefits, but one thing we learned early on is that the more we can articulate what's happening to them, whether they're in a program or whether they're in a experience where they're just dropping in at the museum, the more they understand. It goes back to, you know, how many of us have been in a conversation with outside individuals? They hear what you do for a living and they say, oh, yes, you work in the art museum. Oh, well, I love the art museum. I mean, I don't go, I'm not creative, you know, and we realized, oh, this won't do. We have to change attitudes and behaviors in addition to, you know, providing great experiences. So we really spend a lot of time trying to figure out how do we get them to reflect on how they're using their imagination, how they're getting more comfortable with ambiguous situations. What does it feel like to have, to fail at some sort of project? And so the more we can get them to even reflect and think about what's happening to them, the more that the work, I think, has impact.
And that's why I think the connectors are so important, because even providing opportunities for that, intentionally providing opportunities for that, didn't really happen a lot in art museums in the past. Usually it was just wall text and maybe a bench and the art. And so providing a space like, I know it's probably up right now at CMA, but what did you discover today? What did you learn today? What did you love today? And asking for visitors to share their thoughts and their ideas is a really empowering act. And so, it's a subtle nod to, what do I do in an art museum when I come here? Am I just supposed to look at pictures and walk around and then go to the gift shop? How can we help empower their thinking and their conversation while they're in the museum? I'm not certain that we tackle so well the what does creativity mean in the drop-in experience. I think we do a better job of that in our advocacy with teachers, in our programming with students in schools, with our docents, where we have that opportunity to talk with them and speak with them.
And I will say, sorry, Cindy, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add that we know it's become so much of an issue that we applied for a grant from IMLS and did get it this year, which is thrilling and horrifying, called Making Creativity Visible. And it's our attempt to actually to make that clearer, make it more research-based, and again, pass it on to the community, teachers, etc. So.
Sarah, I just wanted to jump in before we move ahead. Hi from the tech support side. Just to all of you who have joined us since the introduction at 2 o'clock, we highly encourage all of you to jump in on the Q&A app with any questions, comments, or discussion that you might want to have. If you're not currently seeing the Q&A app on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a set of 9 boxes all the way in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Click on that. There will be 2 options. One is Showcase, one is Q&A. Select Q&A, and then type in Ask a New Question at the bottom, and we'll try to get to those questions as the dialogue goes along. Thanks.
Thanks, Alyssa. Well, I had the chance to actually go visit the museum about a month ago, and I will say that it's pretty palpable walking in how much the visitor perspective is really honored, and there were lots of opportunities to engage in a hands-on way, and it's really pretty, the message I think does get translated to the visitors. One of the articles I was really glad to see in the JME was by your former curator, Catherine Evans, and she brought up an interesting debate in an effort to be more visitor-centered in the way that you all agreed you needed to be to accomplish this new institution-wide mandate. Do you sometimes compromise the more scholarly, academic, rigorous excellence aspect of it? And are there moments where you felt like maybe you didn't hit that sweet spot, you missed the mark, and then moments where you felt like you really were successful at it? Or did you not even really feel that tension? Is that something that you didn't actually experience?
Oh, that tension is there. It's always going to be there. And I will say we have a pretty exceptional relationship with our curators, but we have to work on it. The minute we think things are going so smoothly that we're getting cocky, everything backfires. So I will say it is. Every exhibition, every curator is different, and each time we can't use the same model we used before. Now we still use, for example, we have a exhibition planning form that helps us really work with the curators and our director to create the learning outcomes for the exhibition. That is set. We do that. It's very formal, but it helps us from the get-go articulate what we want to achieve with the exhibition. Now how we go about it from that point on, is very different. And I will say there have even been exhibitions where we had connectors that the curators were comfortable with only after we promised them that we would only put them up after the curators from our partner institution had left town after the opening. So literally, everybody's, the openings happened and they've left town, and we're rolling in connectors. So, it's sensitive to that and understanding that sometimes it isn't that they don't. It's more of, for them, their field judges them on a particular set of criteria. So we understand that, and we honor and value that. But we have to find mechanisms to also honor and value the visitor. So that's where the rub is all the time. And the more high profile the exhibition is, the more challenging it can get.
And I think, too, a lot of the scholarly emphasis can be, and I've heard Nanette Macy-June say this before, can be in a catalog where your peers will see your work and recognize you that way, but they may not ever come to see the actual exhibition. And keeping in mind that our audience who comes to our museum is our local community, to keep that in mind, that we still aren't that tourist destination. And we may have visitors through the whole range of the exhibition that are scholars, that are curators, come and visit. But I think it is challenging because there is, a particular world in which they exist, in which they need to exist in order to get loans, in order to move exhibitions forward. So it's tricky and it's challenging, and I don't think there's an easy solution for it.
Okay. Before we move on, I wanted to talk a little more about intentionality beyond the work at Columbus. But before we do that, I just wanted to have you all answer Danielle's question, which was, how has your museum incorporated this intentionality regarding creativity into public programs for adults? What about the adult audience? Are you finding they're more hesitant to engage in these interactive activities and be creative?
No. They need permission, though. I think that's the one thing we learned, is they need permission, and if anything feels like it's for children, they won't feel comfortable. So we had to change. One of the spaces we had that was in the Center for Creativity was originally called the Family Gallery. But when we overheard a gay couple, after they'd been there almost an hour, actually articulate out loud, "Oh my gosh, I don't think we're supposed to be here," because they'd seen the word Family Gallery on a label or a sign. We thought, oh my gosh, the language, the way we present things has to be so careful in order to make all our visitors comfortable. Now, we have done strategic things with programming, some that failed. Like the game show was tremendous, but we realized the people that were being creative there were the staff and our community partners. So we had to flip that and create a program called the Connector Series, in which we loved these relationships we'd had with community partners, artists. But what we did is we then worked together to create experiences that our visitors could engage in. And so we used one model to help inform another. Rachel could talk a little bit about the med school program and some of the other things we've done to engage adults.
That's not exactly a public program, but I ran a partnership with the Ohio State College of Medicine, and that was really focused around developing their observation skills, developing comfort with ambiguity, because physicians try to really zero in on the diagnosis very quickly, and we want them to be people, and be a little more comfortable and a little more questioning about why they're getting to those places. And so we would use our ODIP thinking routine and really interpret one work of art over 40 minutes or so, and then have them delve into more interpretive efforts. And all second-year medical students came and did that. And I think it was the first time that they saw that an art museum, for a lot of them, that an art museum was actually relevant, or that art was relevant to their work, that art was a part of the human experience, just like what their work is. And so I think what helps is if we take a bigger transdisciplinary question or idea, and like creativity, and that helps us make us relevant to a variety of audiences. So it's not like we're trying to fit art into science or fit art into math, but gosh, we must have some big overarching questions that we can pursue together around ambiguity or creativity or something like that, and that makes it more authentic for everybody.
I like the idea of adults needing permission, but then they're free to be creative. I want to take a little step back from being specific about Columbus and talk more about intentionality in general. In preparation for this talk, Carol Stapp sent us a really great article by Randy Korn from Curator Mag in 2007 entitled "The Case for Holistic Intentionality." And Carly, I know you're really familiar with Randy's work, and I have to say, as I was reading the art, it was a really interesting article. As I was reading it, a lot of it reminded me of strategic planning in some ways too. So I'm wondering if you can articulate the difference for us between strategic planning, which all museums engage in, and this idea of holistic intentionality.
I think for me, holistic intentionality is the why. She refers to it in the article. I think a psychoanalyst says that intention is meaning. So what unique value and meaning does your institution have for your community? And I feel that strategic planning is maybe more the how, the strategies and the outputs, where I feel like holistic intentionality is more focused on the impacts for visitors and the community. So I think that they can coexist, but I feel like holistic intentionality should come before, because it's really the why and the meaning of museums or other institutions.
Great. And then Beth, I know as a consultant you work with museums of all shapes and sizes and disciplinary focuses. What to you, after reading this issue and hearing this conversation, what are some of the takeaways for different institutions, do you think, using Columbus as a case study?
You know, for me, well, there were so many great things that surfaced. This idea about the importance of articulation and articulating your impact. Also, the way that Cindy talked about her own modeling as a leader, sort of like modeling an approach by herself. That really was a sort of key ingredient. And then, of course, those bigger questions, I think, that really came up for the folks in Columbus and for all of us about the work we do and why, again, back to what Carlene was saying, why we do this work. And then more specifically for me, because I'm working with, you know, I love and work with all sorts of museums, as you said, Sarah, but recently I've been doing some work with very small museums. And so for me, as I was reading the journal, I was really thinking about what are the benefits internally and externally for a small museum, a place where maybe there's only a couple people on staff, maybe even only one person on staff. And I think internally, I sort of was thinking about the value of looking at our work and our practice and you know, thinking about all of that with great intentionality. There's incredible value to that. And I think sometimes we just think about, oh, professional development, you know, I'll get to that when I get to that. But seeing the sort of time and energy that the folks in Columbus were able to put in that place was really inspiring. And then I've had some personal experience myself with that. Over the summer, I went to a workshop with Rainey Tisdale, who co-wrote this book with Linda Norris. And, you know, honestly, I went in thinking, oh, I'll just get lots of really interesting ideas for my clients. But I ended up walking away with a greater appreciation of the work that goes into the creative practice, making time to really practice that practice. And one more thing, I know I'm taking up a lot of our airtime, but thinking about those external benefits for a really small museum. I'm working right now with a small historical society between Baltimore and DC, where there is only one person on staff. And I've just been really inspired in my work with her, with the executive director. She's, because in some ways she really needs the support so much physically of her community, teachers, families, volunteers, board members. She's really sort of leaning on them to help her move things forward, create spaces in the museum. And she held a program that she called Hacking the Museum, sort of inspired again by Nina Simon, but at her historic house, where she brought in people, and we really, literally, we moved furniture around, and we were playing with spaces. And I guess not only is that providing support for her in the work she's doing, but really it's about relationship building. And, you know, everyone who participated in that program now has a deeper, more meaningful sense of investment in the museum, and the museum is accountable for the decisions that they've been making. And I just see that there are just so many benefits to this approach. So my little...
Thanks, Beth. I wanted to make sure in our last few minutes that we get to our audience questions. James is asking a question that I think is probably on everybody's mind. How do you evaluate the results of the changes that you made? Cindy, you're going to tackle that?
Yeah, I can do that actually pretty quickly, because I think the key is you can do that easily as long as your outcomes focused. So everything we do, from every connector we create, every exhibition that goes up, every program that we do, we have outcomes. You know, what are the learning outcomes we want to see take place? Then based on that, we have a range of ways to evaluate whether we've accomplished. On one side, we've got, of course, Jess and Janine, who worked with us on a number of programs and worked with Marilee around the connectors on, you know, year-long projects where we are, you know, determining the success of those based on the outcomes. We will have data collectors that we hire to come and just work, so they're not us, and then that information goes to Jess and Janine, and they process, and then we have workshops to think about it, and then we move to the next phase based on what we learn. So that happens in programs and in the exhibitions and the connectors in particular. I will say the place that I'm the most excited isn't just that, it's the culture that we've created around reflective practice and documentation. So now that, you know, on one side we've got the researchers that help us, but now we do a lot where we are constantly documenting and reflecting. We're using Reggio, you know, Reggio Emilia, the early childhood schools. We're using their practice of documentation to be better practitioners. And in some ways, that's made even more impact on us being intentional, looking at our outcomes ourselves and moving forward as a team, probably as important as Jess and Janine, but for different purposes and ways.
And documentation builds in, a key part of documentation is sharing with the learners and then interpreting it with them what's happening, and then that has a built-in cycle of inquiry, a feedback loop. So that you are getting that feedback from your participants in your program if you're using that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Tristan's giving us kind of a nice question to end on, I think. What advice do you have for non-art museums trying to incorporate creativity in their work? Beth, maybe as a consultant, maybe you have an insight on that you'd like to share, if anybody would like to tackle that.
Sure. I mean, I think it comes to this idea of sort of opening. I mean, again, what Rachel and Cindy were doing in terms of playing with things, experimenting with things, trying to be open-minded about trying new things, and maybe like what my colleague at this little museum is doing in Laurel, Maryland, the Laurel Historical Society and Museum, into the dialogue to help do more kinds of programming in a shared way. I think that's this idea of creativity and innovation is certainly not, it's not specific to art museums. I think that it, like Rachel was saying, it's sort of this, if we could think about this approach that's pan-disciplinary or transdisciplinary in creativity sort of focusing in on a technique as opposed to content, I think that you can really apply that in interesting ways. But anyone else?
Well, this is something we actually talk a lot about, because the issue of creativity is necessary no matter what field you pursue, no matter where you go in your life, whatever you do, because we're talking about thinking. At the core of it is creative thinking, being able to have lots of ideas, being able to process information and doing something with those. That's necessary across the board. We have, of course, used artists as the point of departure. What does it artists bring to creativity, and how do we apply that to, everyday, what artists do. But historians, whatever your context is, think about what they do that is unique and capitalize on that.
And Tristan should probably let's see. I think we were aware that I guess NAEA is having a peer-to-peer Google Hangout on October 14th, which is just next week, at 6 p.m. with the authors of this book. So it might be an interesting idea to attend and ask her question there.
And both of the authors of that book worked in history museums, so I would recommend getting the book too. It's great.
Good. Okay, that's great advice. Thank you so much. Well, we are out of time for our Google Hangout, but I want to first of all thank the panelists for giving us your time and your insights and all of your good work. I want to thank the audience for participating, and I really want to give a few shout-outs to AAM, of course, Mur, of course, and Alyssa Frankel, Greg Stevens, Megan Wood, and Betsy Bowers, who did a lot of work putting this together. So I want to thank all of them and thank all of you panelists. And Beth, did you want to give a little shout-out to the JME as well and tell people how to subscribe?
Yeah, all the information about subscribing to the journals on the website, the Museum Education Roundtable website, and our fall issue has just come out about teen audiences, and there is actually a reader guide associated with an article in this journal as well. So, but Sarah, I also really just want to thank EdCom for inviting or creating this program, this book club format, where you can really kind of extend the journal content to more and more waves of readers and participants. So thank you.
Yeah, and to that end, it's something that we want to do more of, and we need your help in letting us know how we can improve this format and make it even more beneficial to your work. So we do have an evaluation form, and we'd appreciate if you would fill that out. Alyssa can give more details on how to access that.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So we're going to be sending out the evaluation form through you all via Google+. We have all of your contact information since you all signed up for the Hangout, and we'll be getting that to you very shortly. Just wanted to thank you all for embarking with us on this grand experiment. If you do have any further ideas or any questions or comments about the format or about the Hangouts in general, please send us an email at edcomweb@gmail.com. That's edcomweb@gmail. This Hangout will also be available on our YouTube channel in perpetuity. So check us out there and on Twitter and Facebook. We welcome you all the time into all of our conversations, and thank you all so much for being here today.